I would like to talk about the aesthetics of what we do as researchers. Just as a little parenthetic, when I was in graduate school, I was at MIT and I was working on applied math and chemical engineering, and then I ended up going on and just doing that forever, it seemed, and I wrote a couple textbooks, and my parents wondered what did I actually do? And I remember one evening with Howard Brenner saying, what do I do actually? And he said, we do aesthetics. And actually, that was really beautiful, and I understood that in a very personal way, but it took a long time for me to actually open up my lab to the public and express my process in true aesthetic language. Something's been going on for the last 10 years for reasons that we'll talk about and you're probably all sensitive to, that have led researchers of all kinds, ranging from chefs to artists to designers and scientists, to begin to aim increasingly at very ambiguous kinds of issues and questions that are actually evolving as we're trying to address them. These are questions that are sort of difficult to develop and to experiment around in classical or traditional scientific translation labs. And so other kinds of environments have been created. It sounds like many of you have created those yourselves. Some of them are inside of companies, some of them are inside of galleries. This particular lab that I opened in Paris in 2007 and then brought to Cambridge, this is Cambridge, in 2014, had a certain formula that seemed to make sense given my process. We do experiments twice a year with leading artists and designers at frontiers of science, and we explore in open dialogue with the public. And so we sort of replace the peer-reviewed publication communication process that many of us have grown up with a exhibition and open dialogue with the public. The process, again, is articulated with an artistic vocabulary. So we might explore, for example, the notion of water accessibility, and through an installation, as is here by an Argentinian architect. Here we are often bringing public into a sensorial exploration, in this particular case of space. Lots of the kinds of projects that we do lead to public dialogue around, again, these kinds of ambiguous questions that are sort of difficult to address in more traditional research environments. Inevitably, the context, the global context in which we live, where we're facing these major sustainability issues, whether it's the environment or food or just how we live with technology and with each other, are leading many of us to ask questions that we are not able really to solve simply by solving a scientific problem or simply by designing a beautiful object. In fact, these kinds of issues involve humanity, involve really behavior change and require a massive dialogue. Some of these questions are actually following on years and years of scientific and engineering work to resolve issues, having resolved actually quite successfully some of them. For example, the food system. Clearly, the invention of food additives and plastics and so forth has been super successful in resolving some of the major inequities in food distribution that arose in the 19th century. And yet, over the last 10 years, is this discovery that the solutions that seem to work so well for 40 or 50 years are leading to environmental and health issues and leading to a crisis which is a lot more difficult to resolve than the crisis of about 100 years ago. And so how do you do this? Well, it's really fascinating moment to be a creator today, whoever you are. There's all kinds of dialogue going on now between people who are coming from very different environments, artists and scientists and chefs and perfumers, and it's leading to things. And I'd like to just go through a list of things that I've been involved in my environment, and as Kimberly said, this is a really kind of a personal prism, although I hope we can just sort of generalize a little bit, and I will at the end of my talk. I have 10 minutes, so about 4 minutes here. We're going to go very quickly. So, very interested in this notion of hacking the senses. One of the big problems today is that we sort of evolved by eating anything in sight. And in a world where there's too much to eat, there's a problem. And so how do we really deliver the sensations that people are seeking in overeating and overdosing themselves, and not deliver the addiction or the weight. And so later on, you'll have a chance to waft. I'm not sure what you're actually putting in the waft, but we created this design with Marc Bretillot at the time, several years ago, which is now an object that we can experience a little bit later. Really interested in time. With William Kentridge, did a project around this notion of now, which of course is a major fundamental question of science and relativity and so forth, big issue in the late 19th century, has become an issue again today given the rate of change in the world that we live in. The notion of the environment and how do we empower the environment to actually be working with us in a more effective way given what we've really done to the planet. And so we created with Mathieu Leonardo objects that would take plants and absorb the toxic gases more efficiently than they do just sitting in a room all by themselves, which led to an object which is in the permanent collection at MoMA. How can artists help us run our clinics better, right? And so this was a project related to work by James NAKFI, incredibly talented photographer, and the scientist, medical scientist Anne Goldfield, and related to clinics in Cambodia and the developing world working with AIDS victims. What about the source of political terror? Where does that come from? We worked with an artist, Shilpa Gupta, and a neuroscientist, Mazrin Banerjee at Harvard, led to this work that is now in the permanent collection of the Louisiana Museum outside of Copenhagen. Can we eat or actually produce packaged food like nature produces fruit and therefore eat the packaging? This is a project that I did with a designer, François Azembourg. So all of this really brings me back to JD and Kimberly in a phone call about 14 months ago saying, gosh, something's going on in the world much more broadly than in our particular work, and it's related to this idea that art is playing a very participatory role and really a fundamental role in this world where we're looking long term and where the practical outcome of what we're doing is hard to measure today. The aesthetic process really links us, and might there be a parallel research process here in America that goes along with the research process that we're all familiar with and that's funded really healthily by? Might there be another process that's a longer term process and more aspirational and related to the kind of world we want to live in? And so we have begun to explore that a little bit in the NAKFI context. In our particular context, some things have emerged, like edible packaging, and so there are now, well, this is an edible packaged bottle. Doesn't that look delicious? So anyway, we can make bottles now that you can, looks like that fell off of the last set, whatever. Anyway, so it is an edible bottle. It's not going to show up in a store soon, but this is in a store, and so we can, right now, one of the big issues, again, is not really can you do it scientifically, but can you actually create consumer change, really, that leads to the kind of world that we all want to live in. And so we've made little ice cream balls that can be that don't require packaging and that are now selling. You can make any fruit in the form of a grape. Kids are not eating fruit anymore, believe it or not. It's like too complicated. And so, and then parents are worried about the skins. And so we can actually remake fruit, any fruit, like little Skittles. We're really interested in scent. I mentioned hacking the senses, and right now medicine is super interested in scent. The only sensory organ that goes directly to or nerve that goes directly to your brain is the olfactory nerve. Major role in memory, and lots of research here in these last years related to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but more broadly, medicine's very interested in the role of scent. Now that we're beginning to understand the brain better, using scent, digitizing scent, and integrating it into communications and ultimately personal health care is really interesting, and it's led to this object, which will be sort of experimentally reaching the market here very soon. And so all of this kind of thing has emerged out of this cultural experimentation. So I'm hopeful that NAKFI can play a role that brings all of us together with the public in a much more open public dialogue and lead to a world that we all want to live in. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.